Hello, and welcome to Crazy Calm TV, where we talk to creative entrepreneurs who are pushing the limits of perception and regulation for a better future. This is your host, Matt Aaron. Today's show is titled How to Reinvent Yourself. The idea is this: looking back at your life 10 years from now, during these pandemic times, you want to look back and be able to point to some new beliefs, decisions, and most importantly, action that you took that changed your life for the better. This sounds great. Most of us want to change. But what change do we make? How do we develop a framework to make those decisions? So I brought in someone who's made many of those decisions and been very successful at it, despite them being unpopular, contrarian decisions. A good buddy of mine, one of my best buds, Danny Michlewicz. A quick background on Danny. He gets out of college about 10 years ago, reads The 4-Hour Work Week, which I also read by Tim Ferriss, which became a movement, the idea of working online and living anywhere you want. But contrary to what the title says, it's not about working 4 hours a week. It's actually very difficult to create a profitable online business. Now, Danny did very well with a ticket business, buying and selling concert tickets on StubHub, Justin Bieber concerts, etc., etc. But he didn't stop there. After achieving that success, he decided, hey, I want to start a chocolate company. Now, this sounds very romantic, and maybe it is, but this is a very, very difficult business to get into. And a lot of times it's just stuck at a labor of love, not profitable. And he's doing this for years. And very recently, in the last year, he transitions into keto, making a keto snacks company, using all the things he learned at both his chocolate company and his ticket business to transition into, yet again, a new uncharted territory. We are going to pick Danny's brain and have an honest, open conversation about how to get in that mindset, how to reinvent yourself. This was a fun conversation, and I really hope you enjoyed this show. Please subscribe, pound the like button, all the things you can do to get this show out to more people. Thank you so much, and enjoy the show. Danny, thank you so much for coming on Crazy Calm TV.
Brother, it's a pleasure to be here, especially on 420, which is such a important day for the cannabis community. So I feel privileged to get the invitation. It's actually going to be 420 right in about 5 seconds. 420, believe it or not. So love it.
Oh wow, yeah. I don't have a joint to smoke, but in spirit, I'm with all those that are about to toke in 5 seconds. We're in different climates right now. I am in a 100-degree weather at a beautiful ranch in Mexico. Unfortunately, the AC decided to break right before the interview. So listeners, I'm not being interrogated by the FBI. It's just, it's really hot here. But Danny, you are up north.
This is a fact. This is the fact. For the first time in a long time, I'm spending some time up north in the cold. And it brings back good memories. It brings back good memories. My brother actually is also up north. He's in New Hampshire. And I went to college in New Hampshire. And it's always really cool thinking back at deep time you spent in places and what impact they have on how you feel about places.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking for me to elaborate. So when I think about the cold, or I think about a place that I haven't spent a lot of time. So I haven't spent a lot of time in Maine. I get this weird feeling about Maine. I think about I don't know. I think it's like maybe Stephen King lives there, like the author. And I haven't spent a lot of time there. And so the way that I feel about it is I feel it's a weird, creepy place. And I think about New Hampshire. And New Hampshire is this cold place. I know it's cold, but I have a lot of warm memories associated with it. And I have a lot of character building, what you would call your formative years associated with New Hampshire. And so as a result, there's this greater character and it makes me feel good. I feel good about that place. For example, I love the fact that my brother's there right now. It gives me a connection to him. And it also is just like, there's a coherence there.
Okay. Yeah. And so I've spent some time in Maine. My uncle, who passed away 12 years ago, lived in Maine for 30 years and had a restaurant there. And it's a wonderful place. I recommend visiting, but I understand why you have that impression. But there is a lot of formative experiences. It can happen in any weather, but there's something to a cold weather formative experience. And all of us, whether we're in the tropics, on a yacht in the Mediterranean, in North Dakota, it is going to be a formative experience because of COVID-19. And it's just something that we can't really avoid bringing up. And I think you're an interesting person to talk to in any type of world climate, geopolitical climate. But right now, it's going to be interesting to get some tips from you on kind of how to change your life, which might be a little bit of hyperbole. But Danny, I want to tell your story today and kind of go behind some of the key decisions you made through your 20s and early 30s that most people wouldn't make, that have led to a very successful and fulfilling career. I don't want to oversimplify it, acting like it's all been easy or there haven't been, mistakes, failures, ups and downs. But, I've explained a little bit in the intro about where you are from tickets to chocolate to keto. And so I guess this is a difficult question, deceptively difficult. My question for you is, let's say you are meeting someone who's younger, maybe in their mid-20s, and they're curious. They've thought about the entrepreneurial path, and they say, who are you? What are you about?
That's great. It's a great question. I think that I'm curious in my own way, and just like you are, Matt. And it's really interesting when you're curious in your own way. Not everyone's like that, first of all. It means that you find yourself at some point. You get feedback about your life and how you think and who you are, and you realize that you're different than most others. So you're different than most others. Some people might be able to look at you for inspiration. Some people might not simply understand you. And I think that means that you are more likely to kind of follow your own path, or it might be better to follow your own path. And so I think that that's one thing that's really important, is that I'm curious, and I, as a result, have oftentimes made strange decisions that don't make sense to others. And that's led me towards living a life where I've traveled around the world for many, many years. I left the US, and next year will be 10 years, more than 10 years outside of the United States. I'm in the United States right now, and this will be the greatest amount of time I spent in the United States consecutively in 10 years, which is absolutely wild to me. And I'll start there. Let me think a little bit more. I'm curious, and at a young age, I also realized that I really value feeling good. So that's another theme in my life. So, this is almost like a weird dating profile, right? but in terms of that, those are a few themes in my life. And I used to be really stubborn. I've learned how to not be stubborn. That's wisdom. I've learned how to not be so stubborn. But I've always been really stubborn around the following. This is something that I really value, because I naturally got right, even though it's not like I'm completely free as compared to other people. So what I'm going to say is that I've always believed that I can do anything. I've always believed that I can literally do anything, and I've been called out by others around that. So that means that right now I'm 32 years old, and a lot of people have told me that I can't do a lot of stuff. And I've also gotten a lot of feedback that I just suck at a lot of stuff. And I'm like, no, what do you mean? And I don't, I mean, there are many, many examples of that. I think that actually one of the greatest.
Can you share some examples?
Yeah, I think that in many ways, probably the greatest one that I've battled, that has been, it's something that I battle indirectly, and is being able to, I at once love like the big stage or love like being in front of people, and I at once also like shudder away or like shy away from it. So that means as a founder of multiple companies, I've thrust myself into positions where I've needed to learn how to become a leader, and it's been painful at times. It's been painful at times, and but I've recognized that there's something in my mind from a young age. I was thankfully really good at basketball and obsessed with it when I was younger. That led me to think that I could do anything. And it's hard to translate what that feeling is, because I think that more than anything, it's a feeling that I have. It's a feeling in my body, it's a feeling in my mind. It's a determination and a feeling of purity, where I'm like, no, I can do that. Like, no, what do you mean? It's just an expanse of, yeah, it's possible. And I think that's really good, but I also think it's really, it can harm you. I think it can harm you because you also need to reconcile it with the fact of you have natural strengths and weaknesses. And also, are you being really true to the fact that if you want to achieve something, are you going to work step by step to get there? And if you're not getting there, then can you look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, yeah, I kind of believe that I can do anything, but my track record sucks, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I kind of believe that I can do anything, but my track record sucks. So it sounds like a little bit of awareness and maybe calibration of that energy that I can do anything.
That's a great way to put it. So what you're doing is you're kind of calibrating in this kind of pure energy that you have, and then you're saying, okay, great, I can do anything. Well, great. Well, let me do anything then. And then when you try, you then realize that, well, actually, I suck at this, or I might not even enjoy this, and then I'm also not being honest with myself and not accountable to myself around certain things that I want to do, but I might be scared of, and I end up just not doing them as a result. So then this persistent, at the end of the day, I take this feeling with me of yeah, still, I can do anything. But then I just, for example, I can be just a total wuss, or I have been a total wuss in certain things that I have not owned up to certain things in terms of accountability and in terms of just goals that I've had that I have not met. And so that's always really, that's been really interesting to take a look at. It's been interesting to take a look at in these times of COVID, I think, just because I think maybe the greatest lesson from COVID overall for me has just been that I have been able to observe myself a lot more. And I've been able to see with a lot of subtlety some things that I hadn't seen around myself and how I work. And I've also been able to, I'm not like your Tim Ferriss biohacker. I'm not. Yeah. But I have been able to test some things and see some things. And also, for some reason, just randomly, like 2 months ago, I started to kind of just write out, like, where am I irrational with my actions? Like, where have I been irrational? Where am I actually, it's kind of just anecdotally, just kind of thinking about like how Ben Franklin would take a look at like habits he set and then take a look at what he actually did and be like, okay, great. Like, I'm saying I'm doing one thing and then I'm just like not doing it. Or like, here's this bias that I have. I look at it from an investing standpoint, like here's this bias that I have. I realize that a lot of people have been talking about in the stock markets obviously have this kind of this crazy, the background in the United States, or for many of my friends, has been like the stock market, because you see the COVID's happening and then stock market's almost like more exciting. You can actually put like more of a pulse on it, right? And then you see the stock market's going up and down, and you're just like, whoa, the stock market's ridiculously high today. It makes no sense, right? And then you just start to, it's been cool to kind of see how I react to that stuff, because I have a lot of experience in terms of looking at it, analyzing opportunities where you can buy and sell something. But at the same time, I just realized how wrong I am, and also just how little experience I have, how much of a baby, or just how young I am in that field.
Now, Danny, let me share an example that happened today. So today is 4/20. It's also the day that oil went to zero or even negative on the stock market. I'm not sure if you've seen that yet. But oil just crashed. It's completely crashed. I think it needs to be at $40 a barrel for most of the global economy to run. Especially I think US and Canada, it hit zero. They don't have, and again, I'm not, and we'll get into this, I'm not a macroeconomic or oil expert. And I had friends tell me a couple of weeks ago, you need to short these like shale oil companies. I don't really even know what shale is, to be honest. And my first reaction was like, man, Matt, you're so stupid. You should have shorted that stock. And it took me about an hour. You know, the thought came and went. I was just trying to process this, like, no, but the more healthy reaction, I think, is, hey, Matt, you haven't taken the time to learn, you know, how the oil industry works. So it's not like a fear of missing out, like you lost this opportunity, just understanding that's a necessary part of your skill set right now. And that's okay. You're not going to catch every opportunity, right? So the dwelling is counterproductive. But I think as soon as I got to like, okay, that's fine. I didn't have like the understanding of the oil industry skill set. I didn't really miss anything, if that makes sense.
Yep. I totally feel you, brother. Totally feel you. I see a lot of my friends have different strategies. I think you take a look, and, you know, like what I just try to do is I have a gift of being able to see really big picture really well. And so I take a look, and I always just learned, I studied economics, and I just believed, okay, a lot of intelligent people said there's something called, like, you know, efficient market, you know, I think it's called efficient market theory or something like that, right? And
yeah.
right, I mean, basically what it means is that, you know, all information that's out there is basically baked into, you know, the current market price that's traded. So, you know, essentially whatever you think, you know, I mean, has already been accounted for. So how can you actually trade knowing anything? And I think that that's interesting. And then you can kind of take a look and see, hey, well, maybe there's some theories, maybe there's some things that I know about. Maybe there are some things that I know about more than the average person. Maybe I have some intuition behind something. But then what happens is you have to think about the fact that, well, how do I actually trade on that? That means you have to actually take a certain amount of money you have, put it into a certain position, and then enter it and exit it, and know when to do that, and then repeat that process. And so that's where that's when you're looking at, well, actually I have a responsibility to myself and to the money that I'm investing to do that in a way that's intelligent. And also, how much time is it taking up? I mean, do you have this time to basically just say, to say, hey, Matt, like, hey, to say, all right, I got some friends telling me some pretty interesting stuff. I'm going to go and I'm going to take a deep dive into shale for the next like 4 days. And I'm going to see what's going on. Right. And then when you take a deep dive, can you honestly say that you know more than the average person that's playing the stock market? So you have, you know, otherwise you have an edge, so that you would have an edge. And well, you can read all you want, but if you've only followed this, if you follow this kind of this sector in the economy for say 5 days, you have no idea how it's going to behave. Like, you just have no idea how it's going to behave. So you're just going to be, maybe it's an extraordinarily volatile sector. How do you know that? You can take a look at graphs and charts. What happens when you invest something and then it goes up by 100% and you're shorting it and you lose a bunch of money, and then basically ends up going back down, but that's because it was very volatile and you didn't do your due diligence to understand it's very volatile, and then you end up losing a bunch of money, but afterwards you would have made a bunch of money. Like, how can you respond to that, right? I mean, that's kind of what I've seen. That's what I've seen in the past few months, is that it's definitely a very emotional journey for a lot of people.
Sure. Yeah. And you mentioned the exit, which is really important, right? I could have, a lot of these hobby investors, because the stock market, COVID-19, everyone's paying attention to that. Like, literally people are at home and this has the focal attention of everyone. So why don't I trade? Like, and there's also that pressure. I need to do something to earn money because a lot of people have lost jobs, industries are changing or / collapsing. Also new opportunities are emerging, but that exit, I could have been, hey, it's 4:20. I'm going to go get baked and hang out by the pool today, and the market's closed, and tomorrow there's a bailout and I missed my opportunity to sell my option, my put option. But Danny, you mentioned something, the edge, right? And I think that's a great way to put it. Kind of summarizing Danny Michlewicz, you have the edge and then that confidence. And I saw this firsthand with chocolate, because, you're building a ticket company. I would say that you got the 4-hour work week, you got the traveling and building a remote business, doing really well, living a nice life in Medellin, Colombia. And you get into chocolate. I remember going with you to some meetings as I was in the food business and still am. And you had this confidence. I was like, man, this guy's never even sold a bar. But he has a lot of confidence about building a chocolate business. And so I guess this basketball confidence, was that where it came from?
It's a great question. I think that on the one hand, first of all, I'll say that everyone kind of looks at, it's always so interesting when we entrepreneurs look at one another, because we also, we don't realize the greater context of the fact that we don't realize oftentimes that people have their days and they also have their situations where they excel, and that people are really complicated. They're just really complicated in general. So that means some people might have, they might have a certain type of confidence in certain situations. They might have a certain type of natural disposition. They might just be able to just really, convince themselves and convince others. And I think it's really interesting to think about that. I appreciate that comment, first of all. And I would say, where did it come from? I think that one thing that really helped is just a combination of basically stars aligning in my life, or actually it's not stars aligning, but it's kind of like dots connecting. And it's really interesting for me to think about, because to be perfectly honest, I'm looking to recapture some of this magic right now while I am in the United States, which is that I identified with basketball and being successful at basketball at a young age. And then after college, when I started my ticket brokerage, I got really lucky, like really lucky. Like, I mean, right industry, right business model, scalable, blah, blah, blah. And I know, or I had always read about the fact that when you don't have luck the first few years out of college, you end up usually, most people, not everybody, but most people, they end up being relatively limited professionally for like the following 10 years and possibly longer. So that means that if you're like unemployed, I graduated into the recession, and there was a lot of kind of talk about this. There was a lot of cool writing done around the fact that folks who graduated in this time, they're living at home with their parents. They don't have a job. They're like scrambling around. They're depressed. They don't have a confidence. They don't think this world is great. They don't think this world's going to boom. So I got really lucky because I graduated into that, but I was also able to get out of that. And so then I was kind of just like, God damn, all right, cool. Let's do something else. Let's do something else. Let's see. And honestly, I would say that it was really interesting. I have great confidence in just my ability to work with food. I have great confidence in that naturally. And then I also just didn't know what the hell I was getting myself into.
Yeah, I mean, that's the famous, I'd say cliche, but in a positive way. No one knows what they're getting into when they start X business, because they figure out how difficult it is, and just all the things they weren't thinking about, or what they thought they were going to spend their time doing, and then what they actually spend their time doing. You mentioned, so Danny, you mentioned, so we got, the ticket business, Tulin chocolate, which is amazing. Some of the best chocolate bars I've ever had. And I mean that not just because you're my friend, but like the 90%, man, wow. And sourcing ingredients from Colombia. And now you have this kind of Amazonian, all the amazing ingredients from the most biodiverse country on earth. And you turn that into a keto company, right? Now, KetoDose, which we'll link to in the show notes here. You can buy it on Amazon. I do recommend it. I'm biased, but it's awesome. Try it for yourself. And Danny, so tell me about some decisions you made, some contrarian decisions you made where you saw things that other people didn't, that you were questioned. You alluded to this earlier, where you either stopped doing or started doing something that's paid off really big for you.
Around KetoDose?
It could be around KetoDose, Tulin, tickets, anything. Because we want listeners to learn, because everyone's kind of has to reinvent themselves right now, right? So maybe we can walk through those, and maybe we'll find some themes from there.
Well, my man, I think the first thing I would say is that I'm inspired by friends like you, who you have certainly made huge steps and made huge changes in your life. And I draw from that, first of all, in terms of seeing that that's possible. First of all. Like, I think that more than anything, when you look around, you take a look, you take stock of what are you like, and then maybe what's working for other people. And of those people that are perhaps, say, changing something or have changed, why? Like, why? And so I think, I don't understand this, but I'll speak to you, for example, then I'll come back to me. All right. But I think, like, for example, for you're particularly, you have, for some reason, you just have you're just a bullseye on, like, you have an intuition around new things, not because they're new, but because of the value that they offer. and then you run at those things. And I think that that might be one of the most valuable economic skill sets. Might be one of the most valuable skill sets if you want to have business success, because a lot of the time you end up being early to a wave. And as you know, you're able to ride that wave in, whereas later on, you're not able to if you don't really take advantage of it. You're not able to if you arrive later. You know, it just gets crowded out there. And so I think, first of all, it's really interesting to kind of think about like my friends, and understand what's going on there. So I definitely do that. And well, let me take a second to kind of think about myself in this kind of position to be able to provide some value. I think that there are certainly some rules that I would say are important for me if I'm, and I'll speak about this from a business perspective, but I think the first rule I take a look at is one, I want to own any business that I'm part of, for the most part. So it's important to just mention that, just because of the fact that I think it's something I've thought about I've thought about, like, are there any jobs that I would take today? And I have thought about, like, there are a few jobs that I would take in the work today in terms of like jobs where I would go to learn. And it's much easier to learn on the job.
Like what jobs would you take today?
Well, I think that just interestingly, this company recruited at my college, but I would have to take a job at Bridgewater. I would have to.
Okay, with Ray Dalio.
Yeah, I think, and I think that it's like, I think that it's more with an environment that rewards this certain type of thinking. I mean, it's a university in terms of his philosophy, right? It's essentially you go to learn his philosophy, and if you and that's really interesting, because I think you could take a lot from that. You know, maybe hey, that means it's a polarizing way to think, it's a polarizing way to be, but hey, maybe you learn a bunch of stuff and then you don't agree with a bunch of it. Well, yeah. I bet you that stuff that you learn is probably going to be incredibly valuable. It's probably going to be absolutely incredibly valuable. Right. So I would say that. I think that but I did mention the owning of the business, not just because of the fact that I think that you can gain you can amass a lot of wealth when you own a business. I think it's really hard. So I think it depends on what your goals are. Because I think a lot of playbooks will say, hey, listen, go learn from someone, study under somebody, provide a bunch of value, and just, make no money at all. And then eventually you'll end up learning so much that then you'll be really, really valuable. I think that's really, really true. I think it's really true. I think that I'll tell you the other thing that I've been thinking about, which is I'm trying to be early. I'm trying to be early to the next wave of, like, what's the next thing to come that I'm passionate about. And that's also like that's just getting started. And I can tell you that right now, I look towards one, like, I don't know if you've ever done this or seen this, but there are a lot of really smart, like 22, 23, 24-year-olds that are just doing a lot of interesting stuff right now. And what's fascinating to me is always just how smart they are. But I remember reading this book, and it's a fucking phenomenal book. It's called, it's by Andy Grove, and it's called High Output Management. And I've probably mentioned it to you.
About Intel?
Yeah, it's about Intel. Intel. And what I love about it is that this dude is a genius. I mean, the founder is a genius. He's a co-founder of Intel, but more remarkably, he's kind of responsible for what I would say is like the most famous business pivot that I've ever seen, in terms of basically taking a company that was a semiconductor company and making it into like a microprocessor chip company. Because basically the reason why I say it's such a ridiculous pivot is because we have any interest in manufacturing and just lead times and stuff like that, which like you might have no interest in, but just essentially take a business that's just like a huge public company. Let's say it's almost like, it's almost like, I would almost say it's like Walmart, going from doing like stores to just deciding to go. What if they were to go entirely online and only do subscriptions? And what would you have to do to realize that? And then what would you have to do to become the biggest, to only grow through that period? And to basically just to orchestrate a move like that, right? And basically, the reason why I say that is because Intel was getting hammered by the Japanese, and Walmart's getting hammered by Amazon, and Walmart needs to catch up, right? And it needs to catch up, and otherwise, I mean, it won't become obsolete. But actually, it probably is already in many ways obsolete for many people, right? For folks who are really used to ordering things online and who don't have a Walmart in their kind of in their area, and don't have an association with that brand. But anyway, so a really interesting guy. I mean, this guy just has more. He recently passed away, but Grove was so respected by so many people. And he was just like the guru in Silicon Valley. He was the mentor. And he wasn't also anybody who had this kind of ridiculous, overbearing, personality of Bezos, Zuckerberg, that you see, the superhero Iron Man type, right? So he was just a guy who was just really, really intelligent. And what he said that was really interesting to me is he just said, not to me, in the book, what he said is basically like, you have a really, really big company. And what eventually happens is the people on top are very, very smart at making decisions around money. And then people at the bottom, they're the ones who the people at the bottom, the entry-level people, they're the ones who know shit. They're the ones who know shit. So they are graduating in, and they're just absorbing everything in sight. So that means they know how to do things. They know what other people are thinking about. They're this micro generation that's just, they know a lot of stuff, and you have to empower those people. You also have to listen to those people. So I think that it's like, I think that it's a really, really good time, because like, to be perfectly honest, like I manage people, and honestly, like, I think that I haven't established like, a rule of like taking 20% of my time and looking at stuff online and just poking around, and like, that might be the most valuable time that I don't take advantage of, or it's the most valuable kind of like category that I don't justify. And I think that right now you can really look, if you're a manager, you can really spend a lot of time just thinking and poking around. And I think that if you listen to those younger people, then that's really, really, really important, is to see what they're doing. And then I also feel like, I'm just personally excited about, I'm really excited about the spirituality space right now. I think a lot about that in terms of just being early to that. And that's just because of something that's just because of the fact that I see things, I see things happening in just kind of spirituality and coaching in a way where I have an inside look. And so I'm able to kind of see how things are growing a little bit. And when you see ridiculous growth curves, or when you see when things don't make sense, when you're just like, wow, maybe here's one thing that doesn't make sense in spirituality, and kind of like, just like, personal development, spirituality, I'll leave that very vague. Everyone can kind of take that for what it is, but people have probably seen a lot of like high ticket offers from different coaches. And so they see folks paying $5,000, $10,000 to get coached, that sort of thing. And you see that there are a lot of bad coaches. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay, cool. And it's not to say that it's not I think that where I might struggle is like, I might struggle in not understanding, like, when there are a lot of options, let's say there are like 1,000 coaches in the United States, I might not actually know how quickly that field is growing, for example. And so that's where I'd like to have, so it's easy when you see large disparities in terms of quality, like let's say there are only like a few players in the field. Let's say there's someone who's offering a lot of value. Let's say there are just 2 companies in the spiritual economy, right? And there's one company that's offering a lot of value and doing really well, and there's another company that's like doing really well, but they're not offering a lot of value. And then it's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious as a human to be like, okay, this is not making sense. What's going on here? And then if it's something that you're passionate about, hey, maybe there's an opportunity. But then when things are growing quickly, and when they're very, very, when things are growing quickly and you might construe it as kind of saturated already, but it's not saturated, I think I would actually struggle. I would struggle more at that, but most people would as well, because you're not going to understand the large numbers unless you do some sort of really rigorous analysis. Okay.
I'm going to give my take on what you just said there. Kind of ideas for people right now. So first off, I think you talk about, finding a new wave, entering a new wave. And so right now is the time to observe online, in-person behavior, read books, find some new waves and get on a wave. I can tell personally that, a lot of things I've done in the past have been trying to educate and sell about new superfoods to the world that weren't already waves. And it was much more difficult than right now entering on the CBD wave. And that was one of the things I realized, because when you learn it's really important to learn these lessons. And people talk about entering surging industries. And I've read quite a few books of biographies of entrepreneurs saying, I always enter businesses that are on a wave. But just that one piece of advice can really change the trajectory of what you're doing. So I think that is a wave. You mentioned learning from friends. You also mentioned learning from younger people. And I think that's kind of, as we pass into the next generation under us, Danny, we're in our 30s, takes hold. You don't want to imitate them, right? You're not going to be playing beer pong and going to raves and stuff. I guess you could, but probably not. But just understanding some of the people that come out from this and that you follow, these sharp 24-year-olds, what are they doing? And kind of maybe you can incorporate some learnings from them and integrate that into your own authentic approach to entrepreneurship. Owning your share, it's much easier if you own your share. I think those are the things to consider. Is that a decent summary? Anything you'd like to add?
Man, I think that there are so many things to be learning right now. And I know that, like, we're both pretty curious people. What if you're not a curious person? I wonder about that. Like, what if you're not a curious person? How can we speak to those people? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, but I think curious is interesting. Curious, do you mean that you want to learn a lot of different things? But I think even, we'll say, a non-curious person, that doesn't make them any more or less interesting. They just might be focused on a fewer things, but perhaps deeper sometimes. But everyone's gonna have their interests and passions. I don't think anyone has no passions or no interest.
Culturally, I think it depends. I would say that it depends. It depends on what you're like, but it also depends on the education that you've had and what you've been told during your life. And I mean, that's kind of hard to change during that's hard to change in a month. But at the same time, I do think that it's a really good time to obviously to consume content, and consume content by some of the. I think that one of the things that's really interesting for me is that I got a lot of respect for, just like, over time, I've just grown, my respect has grown more and more for the most successful, like, teachers in the world. Like, people like I would say, like, like Gary Vee comes to mind in a big way. Like, people who have been at this, in terms of people who have been educating and teaching people, and for now decades, Tim Ferriss, these guys, like, if you think about folks like, if you think about Gary Vee, Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, those guys, they come to mind. And the thing is that those, at this point, you can't be so well known these days without offering value. Like, these guys offer incredible value. And previously I would say, oh man, this is BS. Like, no, these guys, like, what is this? No, but, like, if you look for the value, it's really there. And so then I would go deep on that. Like, I would just get obsessed with that stuff and just be like, okay, like, these guys are the best because, they've changed, because people are passionate about them. Sometimes it's, they're teaching business 101, but they're also giving you a lot of lessons around just, like, hope, and, like, giving you good energy to, like, do stuff, and telling you to, like, change things. Like, a big lesson. If, this is a really big lesson. If you've always done the same stuff, then the outcome's not going to change. So
right.
what your inputs need to be, they need to be different for your outcome to change, right? I mean, stuff like that, it's hard to understand that. Like, you got to feel that. And you also have to go through an experience like that where you're like, yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Like, otherwise you can repeat that, and you can, like, you can repeat that if someone's like, you can repost that, you can put a story on Instagram that you see of, like, a friend saying, but it's like, have you felt that, right? And maybe it's a good time to be able to do so. I think it's a good time to be able to, I think overall, maybe the last thing that I'll say, I'm kind of on a roll right now, but I think the last thing that I'll say really is, like, is basically, maybe one thought is, like, we're kind of living the same days wherever we are. And I happen to be, like, alone. And when you're alone, just living the same days, it's almost like a dream. And that's really good because you can kind of just like start to do different things. And those different things start to become like your actual new habits. I don't think there's ever been an easier time to, in the indoors framework, in terms of you being indoors, being on the computer, or reading books, or doing whatever you do. There's never been a better time to actually have habits have a greater impact on you naturally, because you're just living in the same, you're literally living in like a dream, you know, like you're living in this dream. Now you can't do that stuff out, you know, if that means that, you know, it can't apply to things that that need interactions with other people. That means you can't really become a better door-to-door salesman right now. You can't do it. Like you can't really get better at group sports right now if that's what you're most passionate about. Like you can't do it. There's some limitations, but by and large, you're not that limited. And a lot of good can come out of the fact that you're in a position where you're kind of staying in the same place, same quarters essentially for a long period of time. So fuck, man, let's do one or two things, and let's actually make a impact on the rest of our lives by resetting.
And I realize that this is completely different, but I'm just going to say it. You know, the book Walden. It's instead of going to a cabin in the woods, which obviously there was no internet. I mean, we're all kind of locked in. We have the internet, which changes everything, right? And there's all this connectivity, which is its own force that you have to deal with. You know, being able to shut off your phone and focus. But we have access to all this information. We can study brilliant people, right? And kind of learn things about the world and then make decisions. Maybe not so much, what do I want to do, but also what am I wrong about? What can I subtract? You know, there's a lot of things to do. And I'm hoping that maybe we captured some of your energy and some of my energy today about trying new things, because I think that's going to be the biggest. Okay. What I worry about is certain industries that may or may not be doomed. I don't know if movie theaters are doomed, but there's a good chance. Certain, you know, maybe musicians are going to have to adapt. There's plenty of adaptations in industry. We can agree on that. But you know that train's coming, and you get into this state of denial. I've been there. Anyone can be there. So I'm not speaking like I'm above other people. But if you can realize, if you can find the knowledge of just exploring and really thinking on your own independently, maybe thinking differently than others that are around you, and come to that realization that, hey, this train's coming. I need to start something different, which is hard, but start now so that you build this momentum. So when that train hits, you've already, you know, you're not in front of it, and you're kind of in a new world.
Dude, I love that, man. I love that. I think that you're looking at a process of not being in denial about something where you could be very justifiably in denial. Like, it's really easy to make excuses right now. Actually, I think that it's important to, like, and many people, and I've felt this around myself as well. I think that there is a greater tolerance that's needed towards you yourself in terms of self-care. Like, hey, you kind of had a bad day for some reason because you've been inside. And I think that it's really cool to see, at least, you know, the echo chamber perhaps that I live in online, where a lot of people have been talking about that. They've been talking about, yeah, listen, like, let's not be so hard on ourselves. Now, I think that, you know, I think that you still want to push hard. You want to tell me the story that you're going to have in 20 years about what this led you to do, and how powerful it's going to be if you're able to say, hey, I created this and my life was never the same. Like, what's going to happen when you're in 2 or 3 years from now, when you're thriving, but when you look back at that moment and you're like, damn, I just crushed that. So what do? I just never stop. It's a rocket ship, right? Like, if you can launch a business and be successful right now, for example, like, man, that might be the greatest shortcut to just huge, energetic, like, business success in your lifetime, because you know nothing else can really stop you.
Yeah, dude, I have been wasting a lot of energy trying to kind of debate with people that are close to me about politics and stuff. It's like, no, man, you need to use all that energy and build something. I'll tell you something personal. So I learned, I've podcasted for 7 years. You and I started a podcast together way back in the day. And man, I started to see the trend of YouTube. I mean, YouTube is the second biggest, number 2 search engine behind Google. It's not Yahoo. It's not Bing. It's not DuckDuckGo or InfoSeek. And anyway, this gave me the impulse to start a YouTube channel because, we are primarily sold in retail and we're building up e-commerce slowly. But hey, I wanted to start a YouTube channel. This is the perfect time to do it, where I'm literally indoors and everyone else is. And, I'm going to have to do 50 to 100 episodes and kind of build it up. But that's, I'll hope to look back and say, hey, this is when I transferred from podcasts and audio to YouTube. So that's a personal thing I'd like to share with everyone. So they know kind of the origins of this channel.
Dude, I appreciate that share so much, man. It's yeah, dude, it inspires me and it makes me like, I'm like, damn, Matt, like, I love it. I love it. And it's such good energy. It's such good energy, what you just said, right? Especially because it's such a different conversation. It's the creation it's a creation conversation. You're creating something. You're creating something in spite of circumstances, right? Like, that's fucking cool.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of like, oh, you're a CBD coffee company. You should, you should be doing paid advertising where you can do it with sponsoring influencers, which are not bad things to do, but like, why are you doing a YouTube channel? And when you do something different, there's going to be that, just something that you'll have to figure out. And the one thing a lot of people don't talk about, Danny, is, and you might be better than others. I don't know. Maybe you are, but when you take a different path, it's a little bit lonelier, and it's harder for a reason, or at least to initially get started on it, because there's less reference points. It's easier to question yourself when omission versus commission. It's like omission is like, okay, we were falling because of COVID-19. We all kind of fell off, but that was what everyone was doing. So that just happened. When you say, I made a decision, making that decision, it puts a little bit more, it puts a lot more of your ego, you put yourself out there, right? And it's, as Mark Manson would say, who we met, we first met in the entrepreneur meetup in Medellin. It's like, the embracing the vulnerability, which is a place that everyone should go to right now, or some people are forced to. But I think vulnerability is another way to look at a lot of the things we talked about. And you talked about the spirituality space and coaching space and learning from friends.
Yeah, dude. I think what you're saying is completely, it's inspiring. I think it's inspiring. I was kind of in a trance for just listening, just listening. So, yeah, and it's motivated, dude. It's also like, it's motivating. I think that it's super motivating to me. It's super motivating to me, like, to have a friend like you. Like, it's going to motivate me to like, for example, like when you say YouTube, like I have a bunch of videos that I haven't released right now because that haven't released that I've made because I have like fear around them, fear of releasing them, needing to commit to something. And I think maybe that leads to, we talked about like looking to friends to learn from them. But I think it's also looking to friends to be motivated and to be inspired by them. Like, yeah. I think that like energetically, like, I don't know, I've tried to really think about that, and just like, I've tried to, more than anything, just look at friends of mine who are well-rounded. They're different from me. A lot of my friends are really different from me. And are they but a lot of them are just so exceptional. They're so exceptional in like a few areas of life that just absolutely inspire me. Like, absolutely inspire me. And when you have that kind of conversation going around, like, it's just so much easier to keep on going when something gets tough than if you don't have that positive inspiration around you, right? And I think it's really hard to do. It's really hard to basically it's hard to find people like that. It's hard to, but I think you can know it and you can start, right? Like, you can know, like, hey, it's pretty important to be around really exceptional people. And so if you're not content with the people that you're around right now, you have some work to do. Like, you have a lot of work to do. And I've been thinking about that a lot here because I'm in the United States, and I want to actually grow my connections with entrepreneurs in the US right now, because I haven't been here in a long time. And I think about it, and at some point I always I find that one thing that's really, one of the reasons again why I'm inspired by friends like you and others, is that like, I've noticed a bias or a habit, but I think it's not, I think a lot of people have this, which is like, okay, great. You're the boss. So no one challenges you. You can just kind of sit around and do whatever you want. And so whatever you're afraid of, you just don't do, unless it's always on you. It's always on you to do it, unless you're seeking coaching or a group that's going to push you. And it's really interesting because when you start to do new things, and it's not like, oh yeah, I'm afraid of it. Because I'm afraid of it, I go do it. But if it's like, oh, I know I want to do it, or I think this would help me, and I am afraid of it, well, let's do it. I find that that's something that, like, man, I think that if you would have taught me about that like 5 years ago, I would be in a totally different place in my life, and a whole nother level of success. If you told me that 10 years ago, I might be like 5 levels up, like literally like 5 levels up, because that habit, if you kind of flex that habit, if you develop that habit, you're untouchable. Whereas I can tell you that most people I speak from experience. Like about 14 months ago, we're in April, like 16 months ago, I started to interview my friends about digital marketing, because I knew nothing about digital marketing, like literally nothing. And it was so humbling. It was so humbling. I was just like, wow, like I would, and it's really interesting because you compare yourself to them in the back of your mind. I'm sorry you would. You'd be like, yo, man, no, I'm way ahead of them. I want to reach out to them and ask them for help with something, or ask them to coach me. And honestly, man, it's a lot of ego. It's a lot of ego, but that's like one of the greatest habits that I wish that I could really change. It's the greatest, like, it's a check-in that I can do with myself. It's like, man, go into that fear. I really admire, I have a few friends that I surround myself with who are just extraordinary experts in terms of like how to really look at fear, and how to really just like go right at it. And it's so cool to have that, because I feel a kinship there. And because honestly, you can just avoid that shit for your entire life. You can avoid it for your entire life.
Totally. And one thing I would say, if people listening right now, they're like, oh, great, Danny, say surround yourself with these amazing people. We're on lockdown. We can't do it. So, okay, I'm not friends with Peter Thiel. I've never met him. I would love to meet this guy. But anytime an interview from Peter Thiel comes out, I'll listen to it, right? And there's a couple people like that so you can, and so especially people that don't do that many interviews, and you can find them, right? That's another great way. So I have a lot of people, I have authors, or, Peter Thiel, I look at more of an entrepreneur. I look at him as a philosopher. People like that. You mentioned Ray Dalio. We'll list all these people in the show notes, and you can find who works for you. But so you can build relationships with people that you've never met, where you're just following them and kind of absorb them by osmosis. So I realize that people say surround yourself. It's kind of a difficult time to physically do that.
Great point, man. Great point. I think that honestly, the greats are there. It's obvious. Yeah. Like the greats are there, and everyone just like, listen, consume this guy's content, right? I mean, obviously we're in this world where there's so much content that you just don't know what to choose, right? But at the same time, go after the quality, go after what resonates with you, and just go after it, and spend and dedicate time to it more than anything else. And like, it's great to hear, like Peter Thiel, like, yeah, man, I mean, people that have major wisdom, like major wisdom. I love the fact that the video medium and the podcast medium, it makes me feel good that people consume so much through those mediums, because they're highly educational. They have a tendency towards being educational. And I love that.
Yeah. Danny, is there anything else I shouldn't have asked you? Because this has been an excellent show, man, an excellent conversation.
I think that we got to a lot, and we were able to put ourselves in the position of a lot of different people. I think that we do it pretty well. I actually would say, if there is, I would actually ask you, I want you to share one of the biggest kind of inflection points in your life and talk about, I want you to talk about what I'm always mesmerized by your ability to evolve, to pivot, to have the courage to do it. And I've gone through a few with you because I've known you now for a while. How could you teach me, actually, is what I want to know. How could you teach me, teach anybody? But I'd like to learn more from you.
I think it's a lot of reps of taking risk. And so I've always have a kind of a gambling personality. So I realize I have to channel that, but I'll tell you a story. So, as you know, I started out in superfoods. We were doing a podcast about, the Food Startups podcast, and I was importing dry lechuga, and then Sonia, the packaging, the awesome eco packaging lady, put us in touch with my current business partner in the fruit business, which never really grew, and it's still going, but we never got the lechuga, the goldenberry, to have the success in the US that it did in Europe, which is fine, and I'm glad I did it. But the only way that I was able to enter into that business was I had to build a relationship with my current business partner. I accepted a container of $80,000 worth of dried fruit, which I didn't have the money for, and I had 10% sold. And it was, man, I remember, dude, this was very stressful, where 2 or 3 months in, you think the sale is going to come through. People can smell blood too when you're sitting on. The thing about the food business no one talks about is you have expiration dates, right? And so, wow, I remember nights where I was just drinking and just really pent up. And then we finally were able to sell it just about cost. The maybe 80% of it, I only sold 20% to this Dutch trading company. And I remember after that, I had a coach at the time, Shanna, who's an excellent coach, or she's worked well for me in Virginia. And I had a call with her. I was like, Shanna, I've just been lying down, ordering, I don't know if it was Uber Eats at the time, ordering hamburgers and delivery and watching Netflix for 4 days. What's wrong with me? And she's like, Matt, this is normal. You this buildup of stress and pressure. But by making that move, accepting that container, that really opened up a lot of things for me and got me into the fresh produce industry, which I've learned so much about logistics and so many things. And funny enough, brought me into Bitcoin and yeah, it's enabled a lot of things in my life.
It's really cool, bro. It's really cool. I think that there's one thing that I maybe want to kind of try to one kind of thread here that made me think of. There's this book that I read a while ago about how it's called, I think, How Google Works. It's called How Google Works. And it talks about how when you work at Google, and if you quit, if you decide to resign, there's kind of a rule, I think, that it's kind of a rule that Google figured out, which is that if you decide to leave, Google knows that you have about a solid 2 hours to be convinced to stay. Because if you decide to take the step forward towards leaving, after a day or two, you kind of leave, and you mentally leave. And I guess here's the connection that I'm going to make, which is that through action, so the action that I remember seeing was it 3-4 years ago, is you going to a Bitcoin conference in Florida, right? A Bitcoin
Miami, yeah, 2018. It was 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
It was 2 years ago. Yeah. So yeah. You acted, and the action, it's the step. So in Google, they know that they got to keep you around, because if you go, you go. And maybe you make those moves more than most. You make the first move where a new horizon or a new door is opened. And so then and then you have your relationship with risk, where you know very well what risks to take, and you know that action has paid off before. And I think that's really amazing to think about.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's something to be said about continuing to take risk and refining it. But I think the way we look at risk taking is that in general, I think we can be more conservative than we really need to be in all areas of. I'm not just talking about business. In all areas of life, we're a tad too conservative. And a lot of people think risk taking. They think jumping off a mountain or extreme sports, which are fine. Something I'm not really into that much. But there's a lot of ways to take risks, that kind of hidden ways to take risks socially, going to talk to people, opening up conversation, sending an email to someone, reading a book, doing something different, quitting something, stopping something that seems good on paper that's making you miserable. Those types of decisions have a compound interest.
Bro, I love it, man. I learned a lot just chatting with you, and I bet that everyone who's listening will as well. So I appreciate the time, man.
Awesome. Well, Danny, listen, everyone listening, it's KetoDose, KetoDose.
KetoDose.co. Check us out. What we do is we take a look at the plant-based ketogenic diet. As actually, I find that I follow this diet religiously. I also have motivated my father and a few family members to do it because it really makes huge health impacts on your life in terms of longevity and also mental performance more than anything. That means that I've got a million ideas in my head, and for me to basically just ground them, keto, it just makes me actually feel a lot better. And then plant-based is if anybody's been paying attention to plant-based and just the benefits around that in the last year, a lot of research has just shown just a plant-based diet, also with, perhaps permitting some fish is the best way to live. I think that we're on a long trajectory towards eating healthier and eating mostly plants. And I'm really excited about that field. Food is something that's so close and passionate to me. So yeah, check us out. We make some amazing products, including something called the Keto Kit Kat matcha bar, which if you take a look at it, it is something like you've never seen. So I'll kind of leave it at that for listeners to check out.
Yeah, KetoDose, DOSE. We'll link to it. And I just want to say a couple of things about the business. So one thing we've both seen in the natural food space, there's all these trends, and a lot of them are kale chips, all natural, which means nothing. And keto is definitely a trend, right? So there's a lot of emptiness and hype around keto. There's a lot of emptiness and hype around Bitcoin, around CBD, but this is the real deal. And Danny and myself also share this, but a love for ingredients. And he's really sourcing these ingredients from Colombia, making them himself, at his factory with his team. I promise you'll like this as just an awesome snack, whether or not you're in the keto diet. You don't have to be the keto diet to enjoy it. I'm not doing an affiliate code on this. I'm not even just trying to help out a friend. I really think this is a great snack to order. So, all right, we'll leave it there. Danny, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Be well. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.